Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast. I'm your host, Jon Macri, fantasy analyst here at PFF, and it is Fantasy Football Championship Week. Hope you all had a happy holidays and got into your Fantasy Championship final, because we have a big one today, breaking down some of the top takeaways and waiver wire targets heading into this final week. And, of course, I couldn't do it alone. So who better than PFF's lead fantasy analyst, the great Nathan Jahnke, to get you set for a championship week? Nate, happy holidays. Hope you had an enjoyable few days here.
Yeah, happy holidays to you too and everyone else listening. I had a couple of good days fantasy football wise. Made more championships than not out of all my teams in the semifinals. So that was good to see. The league that you and I are in together in the finals in that league. Did not make it in the Scott Fish Bowl. Had multiple players get injured in the middle of the game. So not only did I not make it, I was the second worst team in the semifinal round. So not a good showing in the Scott Fish Bowl, and several overs and receptions that I took that I was one reception off from getting the receptions that I needed. So it was a rough day in that perspective, but a rough couple days. We have 3 straight days of football every afternoon and every night. So lots of football recently. How about you? How's it going?
Yeah, it's been good. It, like you said, very busy. I don't know about like everybody else, but hard to watch every one of those games. I mean, the NFL really did their best to spread them around and put them in like peak family time, right? Like driving around, visiting with people. It's just, yeah, Saturday, Sunday, and then yesterday as well. It was I was not able to watch as many games as I usually do, but I'm sure many people had the same struggle. But yeah, had made plenty of finals, so looking forward to those as usual, and should be a fun week here. Hopefully, bring home at least a couple championships here for 2023. But yeah, I'm sure a lot of people the same kind of struggles as I did here watching the game. So I'm glad that we got some takeaways to talk about here in week 16 and go over some of the main points that we found. And we usually do like a 10 takeaways on Monday, but obviously with it being Christmas, we did not get a chance to go over to have an episode yesterday. So we'll kind of combine them today, right? We'll do a few takeaways from week 16, and then we'll focus on the waiver wire targets heading into week 17 as well. So should be a fun one. I know, Nate, you got the article up on the website as well, looking at some of the actually, yeah, or at least on Twitter, you put together the snap counts. I can't remember if it's on the website this week. Was there a takeaways article?
No. Allowed the editors to also spend some time with their family, so spared them. So we will have the top 10 full takeaways. We'll go over the top couple of them today, but top 10 takeaways, they will be up on the website whenever the editors get around to it, but they have gotten around to getting the waivers up. But similarly, since they weren't doing any of their usual Monday stuff, all of our usual Monday stuff and all of our usual Tuesday stuff will be happening today.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I got the same kind of issue here. We'll usually have the IDP fantasy report out today, but it'll come out on Wednesday instead, just with not much time here with family stuff and everything else. But we will get that out. But yeah, other than that, we'll get into it here and do a quick shout out to our presenting sponsor, Fabric by Gerber Life. As a parent, you've had to learn so many new skills to provide for your family: how to do copious amounts of laundry, meal plan for even the pickiest eater, and now how to protect your family's financial future. Fabric by Gerber Life provides an easy one-stop shop for your family's financial needs, offering high-quality term life insurance policies plus other financial solutions in one easy online hub. Fabric was designed by parents for parents to help you get a high-quality, surprisingly affordable term life insurance policy in less than 10 minutes. Fabric has flexible policies that fit your family and your budget, with quality policies like $1 million in coverage for less than $1 a day. Get your personalized quote in just minutes and then apply when it's convenient for you. It's all online and on your schedule. You could go from start to covered in less than 10 minutes with no health exam required. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to protect their family. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/fantasy. That's meetfabric.com/fantasy. meetfabric.com/fantasy. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Insurance Company, not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. All right, Nate, we'll do a couple takeaways here. I know you like you said, you have the takeaways article coming up on the website. So we'll take some of the main takeaways from that big takeaway article here and start with the running backs, as we usually do. There's usually a few things at least to talk about from running back situations. And we got to start with the positive one here. It is Breece Hall and the New York Jet running back rotation. Not much of a rotation this week. Breece Hall dominated the touches, 20 carries, 95 yards, 2 touchdowns. Then gets 16 targets for 12 catches and 96 yards, leads the team in receiving. I mean, I'm sure like a lot of people after week 15, I guess it was, was a little bit nervous about starting him this week. I'm glad I did. I'm sure a lot of people are very glad that they put him in lineups if they did, because he had a monster game. So, what did the Jets' running back usage look like here in week 16?
Yeah, this week was finally kind of what we all were hoping for all season long to see out of Hall. He started the season as the early down back, splitting time with Dalvin Cook, eventually fully taking over that early down role. Then once they released Michael Carter, Dalvin Cook was the receiving back, but eventually they decided to move Cook from receiving back to early down back, said Cook would start getting more carries, which we thought would be a good thing for Hall because that meant he would finally get the third down role back, which he had to end last season, or at least end when he was healthy last season. So finally getting more of an every down role, and this is the week that he finally put it all together. A big thing this week, we have avoided talking about Aaron Rodgers because we assumed that he wasn't going to come back this season, and he's not coming back this season, but he still found a way to impact things with Breece Hall. Nick Bowden, their fullback, he was taking some of the third down snaps weeks 12 to 14, and Rodgers getting added to the roster pushed Bowden down to the practice squad. He was strangely elevated for this game, and typically when someone's elevated from the practice squad, it means they're going to be on the 46-man active roster. They won't be inactive because you can only bring someone up so many times, but he was inactive for this game, so the Jets played without a fullback. Which meant he was not taking any of those passing down roles, which meant Hall got all of those passing down snaps. And the Jets ended up in a lot of passing situations in this game. 10 plays of third down and 7 or more, 11 plays in 2-minute drills, and Hall had almost all of those snaps. So it was a combination of playing a higher percentage of the passing down snaps and having a lot more passing down snaps in general. So wouldn't quite expect Hall to have quite this good of numbers going forward, just because they probably aren't going to continue to have this many third down snaps, 2-minute drill snaps, but still very good to see that he can take almost all of the passing down snaps along with the majority of rushing down snaps. So this meant this was his first game in his career playing over 75% of the offensive snaps. So might not mean too much for this year, but it's at least a good sign heading into next year.
Yeah, definitely some encouraging usage there. And we hope it continues for just one more week here for those that started Breece Hall and got into the finals with him. Another running back situation from this past week was out of Minnesota. So we saw Alexander Madison miss last week's game, and Ty Chandler kind of dominated the touches. So Madison did return this week, but just 2 touches, had negative 1 yard rushing. The Vikings didn't really run the ball much this game. I think 10 or 11 times, but Ty Chandler did score a touchdown and led the backfield. So did Alexander Madison cut into Ty Chandler's playing time much at all in this game, Nate?
It really wasn't much. We saw Chandler have that huge game the week before, the only 100-yard rushing performance we've seen out of a Minnesota running back this season. And there were reports before the game that Madison was not 100% and that Chandler would continue to be kind of that lead guy. So it was a little hard to tell how much of this was Madison still injured and how much of this is Chandler, or they view Chandler that far ahead of Madison. But on early downs, Chandler took 22 snaps, Madison took 5. Chandler took all of the goal line snaps, all of the short yardage snaps. So it was a pretty clear domination of Chandler over Madison in those kind of situations, which the fact that Madison played only 5 snaps, I feel like if they thought he was healthy enough to play, that if they viewed him highly enough, he would have more than 5 snaps. You don't really have someone active just for 5 snaps. So it was pretty clear he was just the backup running back to me. Like you said, the running backs in general didn't run very much in this game, a lot of passing situations, and they've been using fullback CJ Ham a lot in passing situations this season. He took most of the third down snaps, majority of the 2-minute drill snaps. So it really meant Chandler did not have a good rushing performance. Luckily, he had that touchdown for anyone who started him. But I am pretty comfortable keeping Chandler in my lineup this week, despite the low stat line, just considering how much he dominated over Madison in terms of playing time. And it's a matchup against the Packers, who have allowed a decent amount to running back. So still trusting Chandler this week, despite the low rushing total in this game.
Yeah, I'm with you. It at least looked promising for Chandler's usage, and we've been kind of talking about it this year. Like Alexander Madison's just it's been super inefficient, so not surprising that the team would want to try somebody different. And Ty Chandler obviously had that really big game last week, so that was nice to see, and then nice to see him kind of get the touches this week as well. So I'm with you. I think definitely feel safer starting Ty Chandler next week as well. Um, Another takeaway here: Stefon Diggs of the Buffalo Bills gets 8 targets, but just 5 catches for 29 yards. So down week for him. Down week a couple weeks in a row, right? He ran just I think 18 total routes this week after just 16 last week. Right? And last week they ran the ball more. They ran the ball more this week as well. So they've definitely been more run heavy than pass heavy these past 2 games. So that's affected Stefon Diggs. But anything else you're seeing from the Bills wide receiver usage here that might have you concerned about Stefon Diggs for these final weeks?
Yeah, the playing time has been pretty greatly reduced. He's only played less than 60% of snaps 3 times since joining the Buffalo Bills. The first time was end of the 2020 season where they rested all of their starters after halftime, last game of the season, and they were up 28-6 at halftime, so no need to play the starters the second half. So completely understandable why Diggs wouldn't play 60% of snaps that week, but then the other 2 games have been the last 2 weeks. Um, Tried not to read too much into it last week just because, like you said, the Bills ran a ton that game and it made sense. There have been times throughout Diggs' career in most games where he's taken plays off when it's been pretty clear run situations. So he's getting at least a little bit of rest, not playing 100% of snaps like we see out of some wide receivers. And at his age, that completely makes sense. We see it to an even more extreme level in Miami with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. But in this game, Diggs was off the field just nearly just as much as the game before. In 11 personnel, even 10 personnel, they even used some 20 personnel this past week. Only played 29 of 44 snaps, which is a bit lower. You typically see him play the clear majority of snaps in 11 personnel. And they really weren't using a ton of 12 or 21 personnel, only took 2 of 8 snaps in those personnel groupings. So typically he's playing at least half of the snaps in those situations. And then even looking at his PFF grade, typically I'm writing the waiver wire article Sunday night, so the grades aren't locked. But now that I was writing it a day or two after with grades locked, Diggs, we saw the first 9 weeks of the season, he was as good as ever. 85.5 receiving grade, sixth best among wide receivers over that stretch. But since week 10, he only has a 63.6 grade. So it seems pretty clear that something is up. I don't know if it's an injury. I don't know what else could be going on behind the scenes, but it's his production's been hurting, his playing time's been hurting. And the Bills play the New England Patriots this week, another game where they could very well run the ball a lot. So I know in most leagues you're probably still starting Diggs because you don't have that much better options. But if you have a team that's strong at wide receiver, I don't think it's out of the question that Diggs could be on the bench in some lineups in fantasy championship games.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, definitely disappointing to see, and going against New England here in Week 17 as well. And the Patriots, one of the better run defense teams in the NFL. They have the third best run defense grade so far this season. They're bottom 10 in coverage grade, so maybe there's some room there if they can't run the ball to take advantage of them through the air, which obviously would help Stefon Diggs. So yeah, it's just definitely concerning numbers here, especially considering the change here in the offensive philosophy over the last 2 weeks with them running the ball so much. But yeah, it's going to be there's going to be some choices. We even got a question in. We'll throw it up now just because it relates to Stefon Diggs. Talking about this week, I know you probably don't have your rankings up yet, Nate, but since we're talking about Stefon Diggs, the question comes in from fan Stella Rossa, who says he needs 3 between Stefon Diggs, I guess that's Keenan Allen, AJ Brown, and Mike Evans. So we don't know if Keenan Allen's going to be healthy or not. So if he is, assuming he is, who do you
Yeah,
leave out here?
assuming Allen is healthy, probably benching Diggs. I don't have the matchups memorized for this upcoming week
Right.
quite yet, so don't know how good or bad a matchup some of these wide receivers have. But knowing Diggs is facing New England, just knowing his playing time recently, you're not benching AJ Brown, you're not benching Mike Evans. So it all comes down to if Keenan Allen is healthy or not. And I'm going to assume if you plays, he's going to play a lot. They're not just going to limit him, especially considering how unlikely it is they make the playoffs. I don't recall if they got mathematically eliminated yet or not, but I would think he's only playing if he's healthy enough to play, considering where they're at in their season.
Yeah, I think that Chargers, yeah, they are mathematically out this year now, out of the playoffs. But yeah, it definitely comes down to those two. Yeah, we'll see. I'd be surprised, I guess, if Keenan Allen plays, considering
Yep.
their season right now. But yeah, anyways, we'll save most of the other if we get more questions until the end. But I just wanted to put that one up there since we're talking about Stefon Diggs potentially being somebody to bench if you have good starters over him. So all right, another wide receiver takeaway from this past week was Deontay Johnson of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So coming into this game, he had a touchdown in 3 straight games. It helped make up for a lot of his like lower yardage totals. No touchdown this week, which resulted in a quieter game. So it did get 5 targets, but just 2 catches, 15 yards, and like I said, no touchdown here. So what did we see from the Steelers wide receiver rotation this week, Nate?
He's another wide receiver where his playing time is, for him, it's slowly but steadily declined. It's almost a straight line from when he came back from injury and was fully healthy to now, just a little bit decrease each and every week. So if you look at it from one week to another, it's not too noticeable, but looking at it over the stretch of the last 2+ months, it's pretty noticeable. A lot of it has to do with different personnel groupings. He's still on the field for the vast majority of snaps in 11 personnel, but he's almost completely been phased out of 12 personnel or other personnel groupings with only 2 or fewer wide receivers. Only played 4 of a possible 15 snaps and 12 personnel this past week. George Pickens, Allen Robinson, even Miles Boykin playing more in that personnel grouping than Johnson this past week. Didn't take a single snap in 13 or 21 personnel. And this is also something interesting with Matt Canada getting fired. It's okay if a wide receiver is only playing in 11 personnel if they're among the top teams in 11 personnel usage. Teams like the Rams or the Colts and the Steelers were one of those teams before Matt Canada was fired. They were running 11 personnel, 78% of offensive snaps, one of 5 teams to run it that often. But since they've switched offensive coordinators, they've started using a bit more variety in personnel groupings. We've seen more 12 personnel, more 13, more 21. So over the past 5 weeks, the Steelers have only used 11 personnel on 66% of offensive snaps, which is a bit lower, which probably has contributed to Johnson's decreased snaps these past few weeks. It's not so much a change in how much he's getting used in each personnel grouping. It's how often they're using each personnel grouping. So that's a bit concerning. They play the Seahawks next week, which is a decent matchup for him. So I'm not sure this is quite enough for me to bench him if I've been starting Johnson. Obviously, it depends a ton on who the other wide receivers are on the roster. But I think this should be a pretty interesting thing to keep an eye on over the offseason. One who ends up being the Steelers offensive coordinator for next season, if they make another change or not. And then also what moves the Steelers might make at wide receiver, if Allen Robinson remains on the team, if they end up drafting another wide receiver, what ends up happening there. So I would not be surprised if the Steelers make a move at wide receiver, especially since they've seemed a little unhappy with Pickens at times, so they might want an insurance policy if they do get to a breaking point with Pickens at some point. So will be an interesting offseason for the Steelers for sure.
Yeah, and it's been an interesting season for them too. I mean, you talked about George Pickens and him being kind of a little bit disappointing here in recent weeks, and then goes off for this massive game this week: 4 catches, 195 yards, and 2 touchdowns as well. So that definitely took away from some of the potential for Deontay Johnson too. So yeah, it's a tricky situation there to sort out, but I'm sure we'll get those rankings out and we could find where we are looking to start these guys for week 17 as well. And one more takeaway here from this past week, and it's coming back to the Buffalo Bills and their passing game. It was Dalton Kade, who has been really quiet over the last 2 weeks. Very similar issue that's kind of affected Stefon Diggs, but with a much lower floor, right? He's now just 7 receiving yards over the last 2 games. Only saw 2 targets this past week and just the 1 catch there. So what did we see from the Bills tight ends since Dawson Knox is back as well?
Yeah, similar to Stefon Diggs, the Bills have been running a ton these past 2 weeks, which negatively impacts all of their passing game, including anyone who's had Josh Allen. But with Kincaid specifically, a lot of this is the return of Dawson Knox and him not getting as much playing time as he was earlier in the season when Knox was out. We saw specifically in 11 personnel was only playing 35% of snaps weeks 1 to 5. That skyrocketed up to 83% once Knox was out, and now that's fallen to 58%. So it's better than what it was earlier in the season, just not nearly as good as it was in these middle parts of the season. He's consistently been on the field in 12 personnel, but the one of the problems is they haven't been using as much 12 personnel since Knox has come back compared to earlier in the season. They were using it 38% of the time, so a lot of opportunities early in the season for both Knox and Kincaid to be on the field at the same time. That dropped to 3% of snaps once Knox was out, considering their depth at tight end, and has only bounced back to 26%. So they're not using as much 12 personnel, so fewer opportunities for Kincaid and Knox to be on the field at the same time. So the playing time has been a big issue for him. He played the least amount that he's played in a game all season this past week. Second lowest amount was the week before, which a lot of that had to do with they were running so much, and Knox is their run blocking tight end. So I would expect things to rebound at least a little bit if they start passing more often, but also his target rate has been at least a little bit lower than what it's been over the average over the course of the entire season. So not only has he been running significantly fewer routes, but he's also been targeted a little bit less on his routes that he's been on the field. So Bills play the Patriots again next week, like we said. That could be a game script where they're running a lot, but the Patriots have been really good against the run, so they might try to be passing more often. I would expect at least a little bit more Kincaid. I'm not sure if it'll be enough for me to start him in my fantasy lineups this upcoming week, though.
Yeah, it definitely feels risky at this point, especially after the past 2 weeks. Production line, it's hard to put him out there for one more week if you do have better options at tight end, which again, it might be hard to come by. But yeah, it definitely been a bummer the past 2 weeks here for sure. But Nate just highlighted the reasons why as well. So we'll move on to the waiver wire targets here in a second. But I do want to give a one more ad break, and it is our friends at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is a skill-based, real money daily fantasy sports game. How does it work? You pick 2 to 6 players. If they will go more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you could win up to 25 times your money on any entry. So, Nate, we got a couple here this week. I went with a defensive prop here. I went with C.J. Mosley of the New York Jets, linebacker there, to get more than 7.5 total tackles this week. Mosley, for those that don't know, been one of the better tacklers in the NFL here. He's top 10 in tackle efficiency, coming off a fairly quiet game versus Washington in Week 16, where he had just 6 tackles, but going against the Browns, who are top 5 in giving up the most tackles per game to the linebacker position. So I like CJ Mosley to get 7.5 or more than 7.5 total tackles this week, which is a nice line for a 100% snap player like CJ Mosley. So that's where I'm going. Where are you going with your pick this week?
I'm going to stick with this Buffalo game that we've been talking about for a while now. So James Cook, I will have him not get 65.5 rushing yards. It's against the Patriots run defense, which the Patriots as a team haven't been doing very good, but their run defense has been pretty excellent this season. Only 4 running backs so far have gotten more than 65.5 rushing yards. 3 of them, it took 22 or more carries for them to get there, something Cook has only done once in his career. The other one, Raheem Mostert, week 2, and Mostert's been excellent this season, and it took him 18 carries to get 121 yards. So, especially the second half of the season, most teams running backs as a whole, when you combine all of their running backs, have not been reaching 65 yards. So I know the Bills have been running a lot recently. Cook, his 2 highest games in terms of attempts have been these past 2 weeks. So one, I would not be surprised if this is a closer game where the Bills need to throw the ball a decent amount, or at least are choosing to throw the ball because of the run defense. But even if it is a game script where the Bills are up by a lot, I would not be surprised if they want to give Cook a little bit more of a rest this week after how much they have needed him these past 2 weeks. And now it's looking a lot more likely that the Bills will end up in the playoffs. So it would be probably best for them if they have a healthy Cook who's well rested by the time the playoffs start. We did see Leonard Fournette off the practice squad for the first time for them this past week. That very well could have just been because Johnson was out with an injury, but Fournette, someone who's relatively fresh and has plenty of experience this time of year, so it would not be all that surprising to see Fournette get more involved or just them use any of their other running backs late in the game if they have a lead in order to preserve James Cook. And even if he is running 15 to 20 times, he might not get to 65 yards, just considering how good New England's been at slowing down running backs.
I like it. Yeah, our Buffalo pick was good to us. Last week as well, we had Gabe Davis to get more than, like, I think it was 33 and a half. He ended up with 130, so he really crushed that number for us. So we're going to try to keep it going here with James Cook as well. I like it. At Prize Picks, you aren't competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections. Go to prizepicks.com/PFF Fantasy. Use code PFF Fantasy for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's prizepicks.com/PFF Fantasy. Use code PFF Fantasy for a first deposit match up to $100. All right, Nate, let's get into our waiver wire targets here for week 17. And we got to start off with a familiar name, one that we've been talking about a ton here. And now coming off a great game on Thursday night, it is Derek Carr of the New Orleans Saints, rostered in just 22.4% of ESPN leagues.
Yeah, always feels good that we've been talking about him for at least the last 2 months, and he finally reached the point where he had that easy schedule in the playoffs and got 319 yards and 3 touchdowns. I trusted him in the Scott Fish Bowl, was happy after Thursday, and then everything went wrong after that point, but I did not lose because I started Derek Carr, so that was good. But Carr has another solid matchup against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this upcoming week. A big thing is Carr is finally a bit healthier. Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, both playing. There's at least a chance Michael Thomas could be back for this game. I wouldn't count on it. That would just kind of be an added bonus at this point. But the Buccaneers allowed the 7th most fantasy points to quarterbacks this season. Both teams well in the playoff hunt at this moment, both fighting for the division. So this should be a kind of playoff caliber game for both of these teams. I know plenty of teams eliminated from playoff contention, so they could do some weird things. Starting to see some teams at the top who are pretty clearly assured, at least the division titles for them. So might see them resting players a little bit more late in games if they end up with the lead or playing from behind. But both of these teams need to win this game, so I fully expect Carr and the Saints to be doing everything they can to win. So would expect another game where they are passing a lot, and the volume will help them and should be able to score some touchdowns too.
Yeah, definitely. Love it when a plan comes together and we see these nice performances after we were kind of hoping for it here going into the playoffs. And then now another nice matchup in week 17, like you said, against the Bucs. And our other quarterback waiver wire target this week is rookie Bryce Young of the Carolina Panthers, who rostered in just 9% of ESPN leagues. This past week, it was looking like it was potentially going to be another down week for him and not even crack 200 yards for like the 10th time this season, but then really turned it on late against the Packers in week 16. He ended up with, I guess, over 300 yards, which was the first time in his career he's done that here. And yeah, a really nice game for Bryce Young. So proving that he has that potential, Nate. So what do we like about Bryce Young going into this final week?
Yeah, this I'm specifically thinking for teams that maybe had like Trevor Lawrence or Sam Howell if Howell ends up getting benched after getting benched these past 2 weeks in the middle of the games, and you didn't have a backup plan, and most other teams do have a backup quarterback, so there are very limited options. So only talking about Young specifically for those kind of leagues where you're that desperate for a quarterback, but he accomplished this against the Packers, who have plenty of fantasy points to quarterbacks, but now he's facing Jacksonville, who has similarly allowed a ton of fantasy points to quarterbacks. 6 of the past 7 teams facing them since their bye week have thrown for at least 260 passing yards, or passing and rushing combined. And then 6 of the last 7 have also had multiple touchdowns against them. So almost all of them have finished in the top 12 fantasy quarterbacks. So there's at least a chance Young could have a fairly big game this upcoming week after having a big game last weekend. the Panthers want to end the season on a strong point. It's not like they are trying to tank for a better draft pick because they don't have their draft pick. They are really trying to show what they can do heading into next season, since a lot of people are trying to probably fight for their jobs and starting jobs on that team. And Young certainly wants to help those players. So I could see Young having another big game against Jacksonville, a team that's on a losing streak, needs to kind of rebound in order to stay in the playoff race. So expect this to be kind of a high scoring game potentially as well, with Young playing decently well recently.
Nice. I like that. Let's go to the running backs now, and we'll start with Clyde EdwardsAir. Just 4 carries for 6 yards Monday, but Jerick McKinnon's on injured reserve. Isaiah Pacheco left Monday's game with a concussion, so we got to like Clyde EdwardsAir's chances of potentially being the lead back with both of those guys. I mean, we'll see with Pacheco, but doesn't seem likely that he might be available here in Week 17.
Oh yeah, this feels like the kind of clear and obvious waiver wire target of the week with both of those running backs. At least McKinnon for sure is out. Pacheco probably going to be out, considering he had the concussion, and it's a somewhat shorter week for them considering they played on the Monday. So would expect Pacheco to be out, and really they don't have many other options. Michael Piran, a single digit number of offensive snaps so far this season, and EdwardsAir has played in this offense for a number of years, has had the early down role, he's had the passing down role. I'd expect him to be an every down player, something that we really haven't seen out of the Kansas City backfield this season. Definitely would expect P. Ryan to see a decent amount of snaps, particularly on early downs, potentially some on passing downs as well, but the big thing with Kansas City is it's been kind of hard with Pacheco being the early down back, but McKinnon often being the goal line back. So the fantasy points for the two running backs has often been split between the two. But I think EdwardsAir should be able to take both the goal line snaps and get the majority of carries. It's against the Cincinnati Bengals, which is a pretty average matchup for running backs, but EdwardsAir and the Chiefs offense, even with the Chiefs offense not playing as well as we generally expect, I think he could have a big game. So he's someone that even if you don't need a running back, if you're in the fantasy championship game, you might want to pick him up just to make sure that your opponent is not able to pick him up.
Yeah, I'm with you. Makes perfect sense. And another one here, potentially a more missed time coming up for Josh Jacobs, who was questionable right up until Monday with that quad injury. Then it just looked like he was doubtful Monday morning. So Zamir White still becomes an option here heading into Week 17. We'll see what Josh Jacobs' status is, but gotta like the Zamir White usage from these past couple of weeks, right, Nate?
Oh yeah, another one that 2 weeks ago we had him at the top of the running back waivers, and I'm like, if I'm gonna have him at the top when a lot of other people don't have him on the top, I at least need to trust him in some of my lineups, and was rewarded for that. Had his good game against the Chargers, the 17 carries for 69 yards and a touchdown, and then followed that up with 22 carries for 145 yards against Kansas City, which that was particularly impressive. So this all depends on if Jacobs is going to be ready to play or not this week. But the Raiders have a matchup against the Indianapolis Colts, and Indianapolis has allowed the third most fantasy points to running backs this season. So White could have a huge game if Jacobs does not play. But if Jacobs is ready to play, then Zamir White basically has no fantasy value. So I would not add White to depend on him to be in your starting lineup, but I would definitely be happy to add White right now just in case he plays. And also just I think this is probably the other one with EdwardsAir. Pick him up just to make sure that he can't be playing against you in your fantasy championship matchup.
Yeah, he's looked good. That's for sure. So yeah, would want to make sure that he's at least rostered here just in case. And then another situation, the Atlanta Falcons running backs. I mean, we continue to talk about them, but Bijan Robinson obviously had the down week in Week 15, then dominates the receiving work this past week. He led the team in receiving yards. But Tyler Algier definitely still involved there. 9 carries, 69 yards. He had a touchdown in there as well. So, what do you think from the Falcons backfield?
Yeah, fully expect Robinson to continue to get a lot of the passing work, and even Cordero Patterson getting some of the passing work as well. So Algier basically just depending on him for his rushing production. But he has led the team in carries these past 2 weeks combined, 23 carries compared to 19 by Robinson, 12 by Patterson. And Algier has been a lot more effective rushing as well, averaging 5 yards per carry. A big part of that is he's not getting stuffed in the backfield like the other running backs. Algier has only been tackled in the backfield 13% of his carries over these past 2 weeks, where it's over 40% for both Robinson and Patterson, which is a lot for both of them. But this is a great matchup against Chicago. Have allowed the eighth most fantasy points to running backs this season, a game where I would expect the Falcons to be able to get a lead and maintain a lead. So I would not be at all surprised to see both Robinson and Algier see double-digit carries in this game, along with Robinson still getting the receiving work. So I'm not picking up Algier because I'm necessarily concerned about Robinson. I think this is a week where both of them can be effective, but it'll be a huge gamble. This is Arthur Smith, who has done crazier things this season, so there's a chance we see Algier only run the ball 3 or 4 times and Bijan Robinson get almost all of the work, or we could see Algier run more than 15 times in this game, or anything in between. So it's a complete gamble if you're willing to trust him, but this is, if there's any week that I would be trusting Algier this season, this week would probably be the week.
Gotcha. And then on the Chicago running backs, we saw Deontay Foreman miss this game. It was not injury related. So Khalil Herbert led the backfield, 20 carries, 112 yards, which was a season high for him. And he scored his first rushing touchdown of the year as well. So looking at the splits for the Bears backfield, if Foreman misses another game, got to feel pretty confident about Khalil Herbert in week 17.
Yeah, this game looked very similar to what we were seeing very early on in the season, both in terms of playing time for the running backs. Saw Herbert take the majority of the early down snaps, at least some of the short yarded situations, and then Roshan Johnson, as he's done all season, gotten the passing down work. So a little surprising considering we saw a couple of weeks ago when Foreman was out, and we saw Johnson take the majority of the snaps, both on early downs and passing downs, and he had over 15 touches in that game. So, for one, this all depends on if Foreman misses another game or not. It's been undisclosed what the personal matter is, which is actually as much as I want to know as much as I can for fantasy football purposes so we can be prepared for next week. It's nice that players are able to have that kind of privacy, that the personal matter, whatever it is, hasn't been disclosed, and hopefully everything's all right with him. But I wouldn't be all that surprised even if Foreman is back this week, if Herbert is the starter. I probably am not trusting this in most leagues because it is a game against the Atlanta Falcons, and the Falcons have been pretty good against running backs this season. But anytime that I think there's even a chance that a running back's going to see double-digit carries in a week, I think it's at least worth mentioning because all it takes is for Herbert to get those 10 or more carries and end up breaking one long run, and he has a great fantasy performance. So there are leagues where you might have a lot of struggles at running back and need a running back who's going to see 10 or more carries. But also think this will be interesting for next year just because we thought Johnson, was at least a chance he could be the every down back next year, but I fully expect Herbert to be back on the roster considering his salary. So it'll be a pretty interesting backfield, not just for this week, but for next year as well.
Definitely. All right, moving to another running back situation that where the starter missed the game. It was Brian Robinson of the Washington Commanders who did not play again this week. So Chris Rodriguez ends up scoring 2 touchdowns. Nate, Chris Rodriguez, the lead back here for the past couple of weeks as far as carries go in Washington. So how are we feeling about his potential in week 17 if Robinson misses another game?
There's a lot of things that need to go right this week, but considering Rodriguez is only rostered in 2.5% of ESPN leagues, I need to at least mention him because there's a chance those things could go right. So we saw him be in a 3-man backfield when Robinson first mixed action, but Jonathan Williams was part of that 3-man rotation, and he is also injured now. So this past week, it was Gibson and Rodriguez, with Rodriguez getting the majority of the early down snaps, plenty of the short yarded situations as well. So was the lead person in carries these past 2 games. I think reached just over double-digit carries in those games. So not only do we need Brian Robinson to miss another game, Rodriguez was spotted in a walking boot after the game. I haven't heard anything about that to this point. It could just have been more precautionary. So we don't know what Rodriguez's status for this week is. And even if it is just Rodriguez and Gibson this upcoming week, it is a game against the San Francisco 49ers, where the 49ers generally have been good against running backs. Would expect them to be playing better than they did last night against Baltimore in general. So would expect Washington to need to pass a lot, which they've done plenty this season. So not a great matchup for Rodriguez. He might not be the starter, one, because Robinson could be back, two, because he could be injured. But if he is the starter, there could be leagues where you need a running back and all the guys we talked about are already taken. So Rodriguez could be your only option. And if you're able to get a running back who is able to lead the team in carries, regardless of the opponent, in some leagues, that's all that matters. So Rodriguez is an option, particularly in those deeper leagues where someone might be desperate for a running back.
Yeah, definitely. I played him in a deeper league this week, kind of a desperation play, and yeah, was happy that I did so. But like you said, there's definitely a lot that needs to go right to be trusting him in lineups this week. And then last running back name on the list here, an interesting one, Jalil McLaughlin of the Denver Broncos. We saw him actually lead the team in rushing yards this past week with just 37, but Javonte Williams been kind of inefficient. He did score a touchdown this past week, but McLaughlin also getting involved in the receiving game as well.
Yeah, this is a situation where I wanted to make sure I included at least one running back that was highly available, that didn't need a bunch of ifs in order for you to consider starting him. This is just the best option that you don't need to know anything about their potential injuries for that game or anything. Just if you're desperate for a running back off the waiver wire, all the guys we've talked about are taken and you need someone, he's the player that I'd be targeting. Has played very well throughout the season when he's been given an opportunity, has been among the best running backs on a per play basis, which has been great to see. And Williams, like you said, hasn't been as effective. So Williams' playing time has been on the decline in recent weeks, and McLaughlin's playing time has increased in recent weeks. Like you said, was also getting involved in the passing game. And they are playing the Los Angeles Chargers this week, a team that's allowed the ninth most fantasy points to running backs. So I probably would not expect him to get to 10 touches in this game, but I think going up against Los Angeles, there's certainly a chance for some big plays in there. So I think McLaughlin, obviously don't want him starting in the majority of leagues, but in some leagues, if you're dealing with a number of injuries and ended up making the finals anyway, he's the player that I'd consider who has a chance to have a big game, even if he's not getting that many touches.
Nice. I like it. All right, let's move to some wide receivers here. And we're always talking about Green Bay Packers receiving options in the waiver wire section of our articles and shows here. So we're going to continue that with Romeo Doubs of the Green Bay Packers, who's rostered in 40% of ESPN leagues. No Christian Watson, no Jaden Reed this past week. So he led the team in receiving yards with 79 yards and a touchdown. So still liking the potential here for Romeo Doubs going into week 17, Nate.
Oh yeah, it's been the same thing all season where he's just keeps scoring touchdowns even if he's not catching a ton of passes. It ranks in the top 40 fantasy wide receivers this season, even though he only has, I think, 5 performances in the top 20. But the big thing is the health of the other Packers wide receivers. Watson and Reed both missed this past week. Dontavian Wicks missed a lot of practice heading into the game, and he didn't play at all in the second half. So out of the top 4 wide receivers in Green Bay, Dobbs is the only one who is healthy. So fully expect Dobbs to see a ton of playing time this week, basically regardless of which wide receivers are active or inactive for the game, since he typically sees a lot of playing time anyway. It's just, I would expect his target share to be much higher if a lot of these wide receivers are missing time. And it's a game against the Minnesota Vikings. They've allowed the 8th most fantasy points to wide receivers this season. Dobbs scored a touchdown against them when they played earlier this year. Would not be surprised if Dobbs ends up scoring another touchdown. So a guy who I think has a decent floor and someone who has a decent chance of scoring a touchdown as well. So that's why he's the top wide receiver option this week.
I like it. Another receiving option of the Houston Texans, it's Noah Brown. We talked about him past couple of weeks. Obviously with injuries to Tank Dell and Nico Collins, he's kind of been more involved here. Down game this week though, after a pretty big week 15, just the 3 catches for 38 yards, but also no CJ Stroud, who missed his second straight game with a concussion now. So chance that we see CJ Stroud back, which definitely helps Noah Brown's potential here in the receiving game.
Yeah, and we talked about this a week before. He caught the 8 passes for 82 yards and a touchdown against Tennessee. Tennessee has allowed a ton of fantasy points to wide receivers. We knew he was facing the Cleveland Browns, and the Cleveland Browns have had an excellent defense this season, especially against wide receivers as well. So was not expecting too much out of Brown this week. So a big thing is he's facing the Titans again. Hopefully has Stroud back. View him kind of similarly to Tyler Algier at running back, just someone who he had 2 games recently where he didn't catch any passes, but he has also had 2 games in his past 6 games where he had over 150 receiving yards. So someone who is a very risky player to start, but someone who could reward your team in a big way. So I think both Algier and Brown, someone to consider, especially if your team's expected to lose the fantasy championship and you need to make more gambles in your lineup. I think Brown is the perfect player to gamble on, with probably the highest ceiling of all of the wide receivers we'll be talking about today.
Nice, like that. And then another player that we've talked about quite a bit is Rashid Shaheed of the New Orleans Saints. This is similar to Derek Carr, right? We've been talking about his potential involvement in the offense here with Michael Thomas out, and he's maintained a pretty strong target rate with Thomas out. 9 targets this past week, got 70 yards and a touchdown on Thursday. So some really nice usage and involvement here for Rashid Shaheed, and we continue to like him heading into week 17 as well.
Yeah, it's nice he finally kind of put things together in terms of his health, at least since ever since Michael Thomas was out, we liked what we saw in his limited action, but he's been dealing with injuries. He's finally seems to be fully healthy at this point. Caught the 5 passes for 70 yards and a touchdown, which is great to see. Target share has been relatively decent. I think there's a chance that we could see it get a little bit higher this week against Tampa Bay. And we saw that nice touchdown catch, but he hasn't made quite as many big plays as he was earlier in the season. And I think there's at least a chance he is capable of making those kind of big plays against Tampa Bay. So someone that I think should see at least a couple of catches for a decent number of yards, but has the possibility of having that big play to go along with all of that to get him over potentially 100 receiving yards in this game.
Nice. And then last wide receiver on the list here is Greg Dortch of the Arizona Cardinals. So for deeper leagues here, he's rostered in just 2.5% of ESPN leagues. We saw him score a touchdown this past week. He had 5 targets, just the 2 catches for 45 yards. But like I said, found the end zone. No Hollywood Brown this past week. It's been Greg Dortch, Michael Wilson, Rondale Moore. So we feel pretty good about Greg Dortch here heading into week 17.
Yeah, he's the guy that if you are in a deeper league and need a wide receiver, and the guys we've talked about are already taken, I think Dortch has the best chance to have a big game this week. Similar to guys like Derek Carr, Rashid Shaheed, who we've been talking about forever, looking at their matchups in the fantasy playoffs. Michael Wilson was that guy for Arizona that I had consistently been including here. Had a big sigh when I removed his name and replaced it with Dortch here, just because Wilson, we were banking on him gaining some chemistry with Kyler Murray since he returned from his injury, but hasn't caught a pass in any of his 5 targets these past 2 weeks. So has not gained that chemistry with Kyler Murray yet. And it's really been Dortch who has that chemistry with Murray, even dating back to last season. But Dortch has been the best wide receiver for Arizona basically since Murray's return from injury, or not. Oh yeah, from injury. The highest graded among the Cardinals wide receivers, has the most targets, receptions, receiving yards, touchdowns, yards per route run. So basically any stat you want to look at for wide receivers. Obviously Trey McBride's been the favorite target at tight end, has been having a huge season this year, but I think Dortch, especially going up against the Philadelphia Eagles this week, expect the Cardinals to be down against the Eagles and needing to pass the ball a ton in this game. Would expect McBride to be the favorite target, but would also expect the Eagles defense to kind of focus a lot on McBride. So I think Dortch should have a decent chance of seeing a number of targets, which should end up with a decent amount of receiving yards. And especially if Marquise Brown ends up missing time, Dortch has played well enough that he worked his way into the rotation. So even when all of the Cardinals wide receivers are healthy. They are rotating all four of them in and out a lot. So expect Dortch to see plenty of playing time regardless, but especially if Brown is out, then Dortch should see even more playing time this week.
I like it. All right, let's move to some tight ends now, and we'll start with Chigo Okonkwo of the Tennessee Titans, who got his first touchdown of the season this week on a Derrick Henry pass. He also had a season high 63 yards and 6 catches as well. Been getting more work here lately. We've talked about him a few times, so like the positive trend here for Chigo Okonkwo, Nate.
Oh yeah, it felt fitting that we talked about him so much early in the season, and at least for the near future, this is probably going to be my last podcast for a while as I shift my time back to the B2B side. John will still be here for a while, at least through the playoffs, but I will be shifting my time back to the B2B side a little bit. So I'm glad that we get to talk about Okonkwo on at least my last show of this 2023 year. And he's really taken advantage of a number of injuries to a number of other players on Tennessee. Josh Wiley, their backup receiving tight end, has missed the last 3 games. Run blocking tight end Trevon Wesco missed this past week with a shin injury. Nick Westbrook-Akine ended up on injury reserve. Treylon Burks at least missed some time in practice and was able to play. Kyle Phillips, their slot receiver, missed this last week with a hamstring injury. So a lot of the other receivers that would be catching passes in the middle of the field for Tennessee are out. So Okonkwo slowly but steadily has seen his playing time increase for the past month and a half now, and has been having his best receiving work recently. He's gained at least 45 receiving yards in 4 of his last 5 games after failing to hit 40 receiving yards in his first 10 games. So just has been consistently putting up decent numbers and facing the Houston Texans, who have allowed the 4th most fantasy points to tight ends this season. So a combination of Okonkwo playing well recently and a good matchup. So still is not playing nearly as well as he was last year. A chance he could continue to improve and play as well as he did last year at some point. So that would obviously be excellent this week. It will depend a little bit on the health of the other receivers. I will be a little bit more concerned specifically if Josh Wiley is back and also if Trevon Wesco is back. But I think if you need a tight end off the waiver wire, Okonkwo probably the clear player to target here.
Nice. I like it. And if not Okonkwo, we got a couple other options here. Gerald Everett of the Los Angeles Chargers, as thinking about him getting targets because he has gotten targets, 8 targets at least in 3 straight games now for Gerald Everett, which has been nice to see. And we saw him come up with 7 catches for 42 yards this past week. So there's definitely some potential here for Gerald Everett in the Chargers offense right now.
Oh yeah, a lot of this has coincided with Easton Stick taking over at quarterback, so it's good to see that Everett's had that chemistry with Stick, but this has also largely coincided with Keenan Allen being out, as well as backup tight end Donald Parham being out, so also taking advantage of injuries to the position, allowing him to see more playing time and a higher target share. So some of this will depend on if Allen's able to come back, if Parham's able to come back. But even if those players are back, he should still be Sticks. If he's not his favorite target, his second favorite target. And they are facing the Denver Broncos, who have allowed the most fantasy points to tight ends this season. So I don't think he has a huge ceiling considering he hasn't had many big games this season, but I do think he's fully capable of catching 5 to 8 passes for around 50 receiving yards. So not an excellent performance, but I think if you are desperate for a tight end, he can at least have a pretty solid floor this week.
Yeah, love the matchup for sure. And yeah, in like full PPR leagues, there's definitely some potential here for him to get some catches and put up some decent numbers. Hopefully finds the end zone as well. But um last name on the list here, it is our final tight end. And it is Tucker Kraft of the Green Bay Packers. So we've seen him be very good lately. I know Luke Musgrave, his practice window's been open as well, so potential that he could be back. But either way, Tucker Kraft has done a nice job filling in these past few weeks. So how you feeling about Tucker Kraft going into Week 17?
I'm feeling pretty decent about him. He caught 4 passes for 60 yards against Carolina, third consecutive game with 4 catches for 55 or more yards. So been fairly consistent in this Packers offense, has been consistently playing at least 90% of offensive snaps with Luke Musgrave out. Like you said, the practice window is open, but he did not practice Thursday or Friday last week. So I wouldn't be all that surprised if Musgrave starts to practice a little bit this week, but not quite ready for game action. If Musgrave is back, then probably not trusting Kraft, but against Minnesota, pretty average matchup for tight ends. It's not a great matchup, but I do want a tight end who is available in at least 90% of ESPN leagues. And Kraft is by far the player who's been producing the most recently out of that pool of tight ends. So I think if you're in one of these deeper leagues and need a tight end, especially with someone like TJ Hawkinson, who suffered an injury this past week, I think Kraft is probably the best option in some of those deeper leagues.
I'm with you. Yeah, it could be a nice Tucker Kraft moment here in Week 17, especially if Musgrave misses the game. And like you said, yeah, the TJ Hawkinson one, definitely concerning injury there. But yeah, that is going to wrap up today's episode of the PFF Fantasy Podcast. Like Nate said, potentially his final one, at least his final one here for the regular season. We'll maybe try to sneak him on in the playoffs at one point and get him to talk some fantasy football at least one more time here before we head into the official off season. But Nate, big thank you to you. Obviously, it was a fun first year here doing this with you, and thank you to putting all these lists together and giving the people lots of fantasy goodness to help them win a championship. And hopefully, we're able to close that out here in Week 17 and do so. But for those of you who are looking for more Nate, please let them know what else you have up on pff.com this week before you do go.
Oh, yeah. So we have the waivers up. We'll hopefully have the top 10 recap up. Hopefully it's already up at this point. We'll see, but should be up sometime this morning. We'll have my rankings for the Fantasy Championship week up later today on the website and an article form tomorrow. And we'll continue throughout even week 18 for anyone who does any fantasy football related things in week 18, as well as throughout the fantasy playoffs. We'll continue doing my rankings for whoever needs them throughout that time. And then we'll have my last start sit article of the season up on Thursday, like usual. And then we'll also take the opportunity to thank you, John, for putting this together every week and making sure that the show is running, so I don't have to worry about the tech issues of getting the show up and running and all the behind the scenes stuff there, as well as having the show 4 days a week when I'm only doing it twice a week. So allowing me to spend more time writing and that kind of stuff there. So I've been happy to have the show with you, and I've enjoyed talking with you both on and off the air, and we'll continue talking with you all off season long. And hopefully we will be back full go in the off season and for the rest of the season next year as well.
Absolutely, my friend. Yes, it has been a pleasure. I've been happy to do it. And yeah, we'll continue to keep it rolling, helping people get ready for this Week 17 championship week. I will be back tomorrow. We're going to do the IDP preview for Week 17. And then Kate and I will be back on Thursday getting people ready for the fantasy championship for all those offense-only leagues. So yeah, again, thank you all very much for listening all season long. We appreciate you. Good luck in Week 17, bringing home those championships. And until next time, peace out.